We're excited to welcome on to Respect Her Game, Candice Lee. She's been the athletic director at Vanderbilt now since 2020. But Candice, you have a very long history with Vanderbilt. We're going to get all into that. But first, I just want to say thank you so much for coming onto the show, because I know athletic directors, you guys are fighting fires like every single day. So I appreciate you making the time for us and being here today.
My pleasure, and I appreciate you having me. I also think it's just really cool that you all are doing this. So I'm happy to support it.
Oh, thank you. No, I know Annabelle and I have loved doing this show, and she was actually the one that said, hey, we would love to get Candice Lee on. She's the AD at Vanderbilt. And I was like, absolutely. Like, we would love to have her on. And something that I think is really special just about your story is the fact that you were also a student athlete back at Vanderbilt in the 90s. I know you had such a great time there playing women's basketball. You won an SEC championship. You made it to 2 Elite Eights. Just what was your experience like being a student athlete at Vandy?
Oh, it was incredible. I tell people in hindsight, I don't think I understood it at the time, but in hindsight, I think Vanderbilt provided me the opportunity to put down some roots in ways that I did not know I really needed. We're a military family, so I've lived all over the world, and often sort of stay one place for 3 or 4 years, and then duty calls and you have to leave. So getting to come to Vanderbilt and actually sort of create home kind of on my own terms, that was a pretty incredible opportunity. And to do it in a community that was so warm and yet so challenging, to have the incredible academic experience and then the chance to compete in the SEC. It's the very thing that I speak about to our current athletes. It's just an incredible opportunity.
Candice, how did your experience and what you learned playing basketball just as an athlete help you, and what have you brought into that in your day-to-day job as an athletic director?
I think so many things. There's so many things. In fact, right before I got on this call, I was talking with the post coach that I played for, Pete Gaudette, who called me and reminded me of a conversation that he and I had after I had a very tough day on the court, and I was trying to recover from knee surgery, and I've torn my ACL 5 times, so I've had quite a challenge physically. And he reminded me of a conversation, and it just reminded me that I'm actually stronger than sometimes I even believe I am. And it was just beautiful because as an athlete, I had to overcome a lot of adversity. You have to figure out, when you're injured in particular, you have to figure out how to add value and have an impact in a way that is perhaps different from what you thought. It was very humbling for me. And I think that sense of humility and the courage that it takes to come back from several injuries and to have to redefine yourself and to have to find like a source of personal strength that perhaps you didn't know you had. I do think I use those every day in trying to lead our department. And I'm very grateful, because I think that sports in general can teach you some incredible life lessons. And I know I use them every day.
Everything you just said completely resonates with me. I was a student athlete at Stanford, and I say over and over again, the life lessons and everything that I learned from being on the lightweight rowing team there, that outweighs, honestly, anything I learned in the classroom. And it's not to take away from that classroom experience. It's really just to say how impactful the things and experiences that you experience as a college athlete really are. And, it sounds like for you, you had so much going on at the time. You were recovering from, knee surgeries. You had everything going on. But, at the time, you're also thinking to the future too, right? So if you could go back and kind of tell your 20-year-old self that you were going to be the AD at Vandy one day, what do you think she would have said?
Oh, I don't know if she would have believed me. It's, and I think that's probably for a couple reasons. So, one, because I had not contemplated that at the time. But 2, because I had not seen that. I had not seen women occupying these roles when I was a student athlete. And I often think about that because embodying this role right now and having the opportunity to lead the athletics department at Vanderbilt, I hope that it shows young girls like I was what's possible. And I know that for me, when I watched Carla Williams get her job in 2017, she's the athletic director at the University of Virginia, I realized that you could be someone that looked like me and have an opportunity to lead a department. that looks like this. And so I know there's a lot of power in representation. And so I hope now that, someone who's 20 years old, who is a woman, sees that this is a credible career opportunity for you.
Candice, that is amazing. And it really is so important to see representation. And so I guess I would just ask you, for those young women who, thinking back about yourself years ago, what advice would you give a girl in her 20s who maybe wants to be an athletic director of one of the most impressive universities in the world?
Oh, man. Well, I think that sometimes what we do as women, as young women, is we put constraints around ourselves that we need to be mindful of. So I think the first thing I would say is dream really, really big, and truly know that anything is possible. And so it's one thing to dream, though. It's another thing to then take the steps necessary to try to achieve your dream. And so what I would say is, like, immerse yourself in the community around you. Pick up the phone and call athletic directors or people who are in roles that you care about. I know for myself and for the other women who I know are in this profession, they will take the time to offer advice and offer their time. But quite frankly, you can't just learn from other women. You have to learn from people who are sitting in positions where you want to be. And there are a lot of men in these positions. And sitting down and picking their brains and asking the how, the why, making sure that you have the content expertise so that when you do get your opportunity, you feel prepared. That's the biggest thing that we can do, is prepare ourselves and know that you deserve the opportunity to compete for these roles. So I think it's really just about not holding yourself back. I think as women, we sometimes do too much of that.
I love what you're saying about, really picking other people's brains, relying on other people for advice. And you took this job in 2020 during COVID, which, I can only imagine how challenging it is to step into this type of position during that time. So who were some of the people that you really relied on then for advice?
It was such an interesting thing because I stepped into the role first on an interim capacity and then was appointed to the full-time role when our new chancellor began his role. So we sort of began at the same time. And I mean, right as COVID is starting to rear its head. And so there was so much uncertainty, but I have to say that institutionally, starting with our chancellor and my other colleagues, vice chancellor colleagues around the university, they were incredible. They were just incredible. And so I relied on them quite a bit. You have to just think about, as a university, what you're trying to do during COVID, and you all know this. So you're trying to figure out how to safely return students back to class and back to campus. And I'm thinking, on top of that, how are we going to play games? Are we going to play games? Because early on, it was an open question. Like, are we going to be able to do this? And I would say within our university, with our board of trusts, with faculty members, like, this university did an incredible job of leading through a tumultuous time. So I was able to rely on them. And then in our league, Greg Sankey, who is the commissioner of the SEC, I thought he did a masterful job of leading us through that time. And there were so many lessons. I still recall a lot of the lessons that he taught us. One of them being, we don't need to make a decision before we have to. So rather than overreacting, sometimes you make decisions based, and you actually still have time. Like, you actually don't have to make that decision yet. Right, because there may be an opportunity to gather more information and to glean from other resources, and then make the decision when you have to make it. And especially in the world of COVID, where things were changing rapidly. And I thought we embodied that, or kind of embodied those lessons on our campus too. So it was a tough time, but it was an incredible time to learn.
Candice, that's really cool to just learn about more of like what was going on behind the scenes, and probably conversations that none of your student athletes were in on. As a student athlete myself, it was my freshman year at Boston College during 2020, and I was playing a spring sport, but it truly affected our entire fall fall ball and all the things. And I know
Yes.
there can be some pushback from the athlete's standpoint because you're not in those conversations. You probably don't know the severity of the regulations and truly what was going on just in the world. So how did you communicate? What was your tone, and how did you really have that relationship with your student athletes when it was probably a really hard time to be cordial?
It's a great question. I think, it's really important to me to cultivate great relationships with our student athletes. And so I try to, as busy as I am, I try to make that a priority, because I think that, you tend to give more grace and space to people that you understand and you have a relationship with, right? That's just human nature. And I think oftentimes too, with our student athletes, they want to understand the why behind what we're doing. And so we try to be very intentional. I try to be very intentional about explaining and providing as much context and rationale behind the decisions that we were making. And to the degree that we can involve student athletes in any decisions, we want to do that. Their input is really important. I know that, I'm sure you had it at BC and had it at Stanford, like a student athlete advisory council is often used to provide input on processes and policies and decisions that we're making. But I think first and foremost, I wanted the men and women who represented us to know that we were putting their best interests at the forefront. And that was guiding all of the decisions that we were making. And so I just tried to do that as much as possible. During COVID, we had to over communicate. I don't think you could communicate too much during that time.
There was also a really fun story that came out of 2020 as well, and that was Sarah Fuller, who became the first woman to play in a Power 5 game. She obviously suited up for Vandy. What was it like to get to have that story take place at your school?
What's very interesting about that is that, so of course it's COVID, so there's a lot of protocols in place. We're testing student athletes multiple times a week. We had just gotten the latest, round of test results and realized that the likelihood of us being short in a couple of different position groups was pretty high. And so the original conversations didn't even include me. Our football coach at the time was good friends with our soccer coach. And I guess at some point they talked about, well, gosh, soccer had just won an SEC championship. They had literally just come back to campus. It's Sunday. And I guess there was a conversation that happened like between Sunday and Monday that's like, well, I think Sarah Fuller or somebody on team could help us. She's already in the testing protocol. She can kick, she it's really, when you really think about it at the core, it's pretty understandable and simple. So I remember being in my office. I was in here on that Tuesday of that week, and it was said to me in passing, hey, Sarah Fuller might be joining the football team because we need a kicker. And I remember my comment was, well, we got to make sure she goes through compliance. Like, I didn't give the answer that's like, oh my gosh, we have a woman, and what about this, and what about that? It was like, you're talking to me about a student athlete who's on one roster, who's joining another roster. You guys evidently have worked that out. Make sure that she hits all of the eligibility things and she can be added to the roster. I don't think anything else about it. And I laugh now because we were just doing business. Like this was not, it wasn't anything else. And honestly, I take great pride in that, because this was just one team looked at another team and said, hey, can you help us? We think that within this community, you have something that could be beneficial for us. And so, I try to travel with the team as much as I can. So I got on the plane that Friday, and I told my husband, it didn't even occur to me until I saw her get on the plane. And she has on the same travel sweats, and I'm like, Sarah Fuller is on the football team. Like, it was like, okay. So that was a moment. And then, so we were going to Missouri. It was an early game. And so the next morning I come down to the lobby. There's a TV in the lobby and game day is on. And I see our soccer coach on College Game Day. And I'm like, oh. And he's sitting in his home and Christmas tree behind him and slowly connecting the dots. And the players are coming out of the meeting room and I see her. And my point is, it was just another student athlete who was stepping up, doing what she felt needed to be done. And I recall sitting in Missouri Stadium when she actually did step in, and all the little girls, I was sitting in a suite and I looked down in the stands and I saw all these little girls just going crazy. And I thought, well, this is a very special moment. And that's it,
Wow, I just so enjoy. I felt like I was watching a movie listening to you give that story. That was just incredible. They got to do an E60 just on your, perspective from that. That was so awesome.
I've been known to be a little long-winded, so I apologize.
No, that was incredible. And just for me personally to hear the background of that and really what was going through your mind during that entire experience. And I really just loved how you said it was just one team helping out another team, because that just shows the culture at Vanderbilt. But I do want to ask you about another football situation and what was going through your mind when Alabama, you guys upset number 1 Alabama. You guys had the goalpost down Broadway Street. I mean, Nashville was literally on fire. So as an athletic director, what goes through your head when you see students storm the field and carrying goalposts down Broadway?
When it was such an incredible moment. And as someone who, my parents are in Alabama, I'm originally from Alabama, so it just made it even sweeter. But what was clear to me, so I usually start games down on the sideline, and then I'll come back in the fourth quarter. So I come back in the fourth quarter, and once it was evident that we were going to win the game, right there at the end, I spoke to our police chief and I said, the most important thing is we have to make sure that Alabama's players and staff get off this field safely. And that's really, that's really important. And we want to make sure that everyone is safe, because I was fully aware that our students and our fans were going to rush the field. And, the constraints or the parameters that are in place are for safety reasons. So that was first and foremost on my mind. I'm so happy we're celebrating, but we wanted to make sure that happened. And then you just hope that you keep everybody safe. I was down on the field, lots of hugs, lots of screaming, lots of yelling. I turned around and I saw the one goal post start to waver, and I'm like, I know what's going to happen here. I have to tell you that I did not expect that hundreds of Vanderbilt students would exit the stadium with the goalpost and take it 25 blocks. And that's actually true, 25 blocks, and throw it in the river. I did not expect that. But if ever there was like an illustration of how athletics can galvanize a community, then there's one. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I remember watching that whole thing go down, and I had the exact same thought that Annabelle did. I was like, I wonder what an AD thinks about in that moment. And, it's funny because I saw this clip. I think it was actually Reese Witherspoon. She was talking about how, there's in a lot of movies, a lot of times women are saying like, oh, what do you do in this moment? Like, oh, what do we do? And she's like, it's so funny because I have never seen a woman in a crisis situation think to herself, what do we do? And, that was exactly you in that moment. And I think it's just a testament to like women are more than capable of being in these positions. Like we know like how to handle these situations. But that being said, only 15% of athletic directors in Division I sports right now are women. So what's it really going to take to open more doors for women to hold these positions?
So I love that Reese Witherspoon said that, and I could not agree more with her. I love that you shared that. I'm gonna hold on to that. I think there's a narrative and there are some stereotypes that we have to overcome, right? But I think the reality is that, and this is not just in athletics, I'm sure that when there are multiple industries and spaces where this probably holds true. We sometimes act like that there are conditions and rules of engagement that just can't change. Sometimes we're like, well, if you're going to be an AD, you need to have played football. Well, that's not true. Right? Like that's not true. The job of an AD is not to like go and play. That's not what we do. Right? That's not what we do. So you start to see a shift from that. And then, we sort of act like there's only sometimes one way to do things. The reality is that I know plenty of men and women who are innovative and thoughtful and have great content expertise, and they can build relationships and generate revenue, and they can lead complex and large organizations. And that's what an athletic director does. And so I think we just have to make the conscious decision for those who are decision makers that we are going to expand our thinking and actually recognize who has earned the opportunity to do this. And so I think as women too, and we have to make sure that the way that we're speaking, I used to say, well, when I got the job, and now I really try to hold myself accountable to saying when I earned the job, because I don't, it wasn't given to me. I think I earned it. And I think that, and it's, facts are facts. And when people say, oh, the first Black or first female athletic director in the SEC and first Black female in the SEC, and that's a fact, but that's really a shame that in 2020 we're talking about the first of anything, right? Because it's not for a lack of talent, right? It's not for a lack of a pipeline. It's simply the lack of opportunity created by the people who hold the keys to that. So I'm grateful that Vanderbilt allowed me to demonstrate that I was ready for this job. And I hope, and I'm glad that Virginia did that. I'm glad that Duke did that. I'm glad that USC did that. And, oh man, I want to make sure I'm not leaving anybody out. I'm glad that Arizona did that. I'm glad, but the reality is, like, it's not just there. It's just people who have earned the right should get the chance, male or female.
Candice, that's incredible.
I know I left somebody out. Who did I leave out? Who did I leave out? Oh my God, I hate this so much. I'm so sorry. In Division I, USC.
You know what? It's okay. I think the point was made, and it's really just the fact that, like, you, first of all, you earned this. And I love what you said about this. It's like, no, I wasn't given this job. I earned this job. And there's so many times, even in my career, that people have told me, like, oh, like, they did you a favor. Like, this company or this school did you a favor by letting you have this opportunity. It's like, no, I earned this opportunity by the work that I've done, and I'm clearly qualified for this job. And obviously, you're so qualified for the role that you're in. And I know that all the student athletes at Vandy are so lucky to have you.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I really do.
And Candice, it goes the other way as well. Like you saying that, having to earn it, it shows your student athletes, hey, you're at the top of this athletic program. You're saying, hey, this is the standard. You need to meet this. And if you want anything in life, you do have to earn it. So just excited for your student athletes and the leadership that you have brought. My cousin, Grace Hasselbeck, is a freshman on the women's lacrosse team. And I was texting her before this, and she said, Annabelle, I have nothing really to tell you besides the fact that I absolutely love being a student athlete here. So thank you so much for just taking the time to talk to us today. We know you got a lot going on, but we're out here in Boston, but we're cheering on Vandy all the way from the East Coast. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Well, I really appreciate it. I'm really proud for what you all are doing too. So congratulations, and thank you for having me.